Welcome to the InChrysallis Podcast. I'm your host, Romain Godfrey. This is episode 2, and today I want to go deeper into shadow work. Not as an abstract concept, but as a daily inner reflection practice. I'm going to share how journaling and conscious self-observation have helped me, and why making the unconscious conscious, as Carl Jung said, has been one of the most transformative things in my life. But before we get into what shadow work actually is, I want to start with the benefits. Because shadow work isn't just something you do in a journal. It changes how you move in your everyday life, in your relationships, in your work, and even how you feel in your body. So let's talk about what actually happens when you start doing conscious shadow work. You become more observant of your feelings, reactions, habits, and tendencies. So you start noticing your inner world with more honesty. For example, I became aware of a reaction I had every time a particular coworker forgot to submit his end of month reports, which was every single month. My internal monologue was, here we go again. He's forgotten again. When is he going to get it? I mean, this delays my finance reports. And it ultimately impacts their reports because it shows their performance. That narrative would stress me out, irritate me, and I'd draft a snotty email to him again. And it was after 6 months or so, I began to realize that I was in a loop. I was reacting the same way every single time he forgot to submit those reports on time. And that was every month. So shadow work helped me observe the pattern instead of being stuck inside it. The second thing that happens is you become less reactive and more contemplative. Now, I don't know if I've said that word correctly, but you become less reactive and perhaps more thoughtful, and the reason why I'm saying thoughtful is not you're becoming kind or you're becoming, you're thinking about what is happening rather than reacting to it. So you feel like you've taken a step back from your own emotions. And this actually feeds into spiritual teaching where you become the observer of your life. It's like you're watching a film. The characters are experiencing frustration or anger, but you are the one watching and reflecting. So you may experience empathy for the characters, but you are not going to react as if you are in the film. So in that same work example, I still felt the frustration, but I didn't let it drive me or my behavior. I didn't let it drive the car. I was able to start writing calm, clear emails explaining the impact of the late reports and how it affected his own team's budget's reporting accuracy. So the emotions are there, but they no longer dictated my behavior. So the third thing that also happens is you experience more pockets of peace and contentment. So a lot of people talk about, I want to be happy. And I understand why they refer to being happy, because happiness is a very desirable state to be in. You talk about a happy marriage, or, a holiday that makes you happy. But it is an emotion that has got a start and an end. Whereas contentment and peace, you can experience difficult situations and still have the emotion of contentment and peace. So you're not, when you start doing conscious shadow work, you'll find that firstly in a day and then in a week, you may not have peaks of happiness, but you can have a state of contentment for longer durations. Shadow work is about understanding that the world and you are not perfect, and it's about embracing imperfection. Happiness in of itself as something that you want to pursue is not feasible. It's not feasible to be constantly happy every day, every hour. And I'm sure most of us know that. But you can experience more moments during your day, your week, or your month where your nervous system settles and you feel okay, and you feel steady and grounded. And that's a sort of underrated form of freedom. So the other thing that happens when you do conscious shadow work is your creativity blossoms. And I don't just mean this in an artistic way, painting and drawing and, things that we think of as typically creative. I'm talking about your brain gets freed up for exciting things like new ideas. You build the capacity for better problem solving. You begin to feel clearer in your mind. So you've got a clarity that comes with each new progression after doing shadow work. You start finding innovative ways to support your children, your workplace team, your partner, and solutions do crop up, things that you couldn't see before. You start thinking differently so that you can see the solution. So it's like your internal clutter starts to clear and your creativity has room to breathe. You shift from survival mode to forward thinking mode. When I moved out of survival mode, I could finally manage my finances better, cook and eat nurturing food. So I started meal planning, and planning those meals was a very organized step-by-step process. There was clarity on what I wanted to eat, clarity on what I didn't want to eat. I began to exercise with more presence. So before, I used to exercise as a means to an end, and I began to exercise with presence and enjoying each movement. Now, that didn't mean that I extended the amount of time I exercised. Goodness, that's, I remained at the same 10, 15 minutes a day type of person, but I became more focused with each movement and how it was benefiting me. I was able to expand my capacity to learn new skills. And this is really important because in InChrysallis, I am going to cover a lot about trauma and the impact on the brain, the impact on the body, and how it impacts you as a child. Now, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I actually thought that I had ADHD, but they were unable to diagnose me with ADHD because the PTSD symptoms seemed to be more more clear, and it made learning really difficult for me. But with shadow work and the clarity I got from it, I was able to clear the mind and begin to learn new skills. And then my decision making also became clearer. I was making decisions from vision rather than from fear. So survival mode keeps you in short-term thinking, and shadow work helps you to reclaim your long-term horizon. Your nervous system begins to regulate. We're learning more and more that trauma lives in the body. So therapy is powerful, but a somatic or body-aware approach helps address the trauma energy stored physically. So practices like breath work or meditation are wonderful. But when your mind is overwhelmed, your body often can't relax enough to even enter these practices. Shadow work helps create that psychological space needed for the body to soften and settle. You become more authentic in a grounded, practical way. Now, for me, authentic can feel like an abstract word. I don't know if you feel the same. But I'll tell you what I feel authenticity is. For me, authenticity is simply your heart, your mind, and your behavior moving in the same direction. So when you're in survival mode, these three things rarely match. You can feel one thing, think another thing, and behave in a completely different way because you're performing what society expects. Shadow work helps bring your inner world and your outer world into alignment. You're able to name what you feel inside, and that's, to me, that it's a process of beginning to understand that every emotion is valid and you are allowed to be, or not even allowed, it's your God-given right as a human being to be able to feel each and every emotion authentically, so both internally and externally. So we'll get into more of this as we go along, working through the InChrysallis framework, which I am going to introduce in episode 3. Another benefit of shadow work is you develop healthier boundaries without guilt. So we all talk about boundaries, and to be honest, sometimes that's a really grey area because a lot of people misunderstand boundaries as a way to be quite ruthless with other people, and that's not what it is. When you become more clear on who you are, what you need, what you desire, when you learn yourself, which is what you're doing through shadow work, you become more clear when something does not align with you. So where before you were constantly saying yes, and deep inside it was shouting no, but you never really paid attention to what your inside was saying. That inner clarity that you get from doing shadow work means that inner message starts becoming clearer. And so you start honoring yourself. It doesn't mean that you are rude to the people around you. It just means that you are able to state what works for you, what's beneficial for you, and they are able to understand better on how much they can expect in a particular thing. So we get examples of statements that we can make, and this isn't for everyone. It depends on how we speak, on the languages we speak, but this is just the framework. No, that doesn't work for me. Just give me a moment to think about it. Yeah, I can help, but not in the way that you are asking for. There are other ways I can give you support. So let's just talk about that. So boundaries are where you honor yourself, but understand that you live in a community and in a society, and you have a family and you have children. So you're not walking around just going, no, 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 no. You are beginning to understand that you and your needs are as important as your child's, as your partner's, and how can things be done so that you are also considered. So that was my experience of developing healthier boundaries. Your relationships improve because you understand your triggers. That is, you understand yourself better. You start becoming so attuned. As soon as something happens, there is something in your body that goes, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel comfortable. And where before that thing would happen, but there was no interruption between that little nudge in your body and the trigger or the behavior that comes out from that nudge, there was no delay process. There was no stop, think, and how can I handle this better process. So you were in a constant state of reactivity. So shadow work helps you put in those pauses to think when the trigger goes off. And let's just be clear, the trigger is your friend. It is a message. It is not the enemy. So saying someone is triggered, what you're actually doing is you're pointing to the behavior, the reactivity of the trigger. But whatever the trigger actually is, the message is absolutely valid, and it's important for that person to learn to listen to that message. And that's what we're going to try and separate with shadow work. I have that feeling in my body. I'm feeling offended. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling annoyed. I'm feeling defensive. Then, how am I going to behave? How am I going to process it? So most people do not separate those two steps. They feel the feeling, they react. Shadow work says all of these emotions are messages, they're signals. What it needs from you is time to really think through. And this is so frustrating because you think, oh my word, I have like 3 or 4 triggers a day. Does that mean that I have to do deep, in-depth shadow work for every single trigger? And the answer to that is yes and no. Because sometimes when you start looking at a particular trigger and you start excavating and digging deeper and trying to explore that further, what you can end up doing is when you heal that particular area, you do end up healing other parts of you, which means that in a day where you had 3 triggers, you may only have 1 or 2, and you have less triggers because you are dealing with an underlying issue that covered a host of different events that were triggered by a host of different events. So we can go into that in more detail again as well with the InChrysallis framework. But ultimately, you stop projecting, you stop reacting to old pain as if it's new. You communicate from clarity instead of tension. This doesn't just improve intimate relationships, it improves workplace dynamics, your friendships, the quality of your parenting. It improves across the board. So another benefit is you take more accountability with less shame. Now, shame is a tricky one because shame is a core foundation across the board. If you are a human being, you are going to experience a level of shame. And the level of shame you experience is in direct proportion to the amount of shame-based experiences you had as a child. So shame is a normal, natural emotion, and it doesn't feel good, but it's not supposed to feel good. Shame as an emotion is also a message. It's not the same as guilt, but it also serves a purpose. A healthy amount of shame keeps humanity empathetic, compassionate. It keeps us conscious. An unhealthy amount of shame is debilitating. And that's what I'm going to be pointing to when I talk about taking accountability. So when you have a healthy level of shame and you're able to take accountability, you stop defending, you stop blaming, and you stop outsourcing responsibility. Instead, you start to think, okay, what's happening inside me? What is the situation showing me? And accountability becomes empowering instead of soul-crushing. So all these areas that I've covered definitely need expanding on because they do take time to develop. They are skills that you can develop, and it's a gentle and careful process. Healing is a gentle and careful process. It's by layers and it's not linear. So now we've talked about the benefits. Let's go into what shadow work actually is. And I want to cover this in a way that's simple, relatable, and grounded in everyday life. When people hear the term shadow work, they often think it's something dark, scary, or even woo-woo, but it's really not. Shadow work is simply the practice of bringing the parts of yourself that you don't normally see into the light. So I'm going to quote this very famous quote that you may have heard. It's by Carl Jung. It's about making the unconscious conscious. Okay, so we'll go into this into more detail in the next part of the podcast. As I wrap up this conversation, I realized the depth of what we explored today naturally filled the 30 minutes I set aside for each episode. So I've decided to split this into episode 2, part 1 and part 2. Today we focused on the benefits of shadow work, why it matters, how it can transform your relationship with yourself, and why it's one of the most powerful tools we have for reclaiming our wholeness. If anything in part 1 resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Here are 2 gentle reflection questions to guide your share. What part of yourself have you been tiptoeing around that might actually be asking for compassion rather than avoidance? And where in your life do you feel stuck? And what might that stuckness be trying to reveal to you? If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when episode 2, part 2 comes out. And that covers what shadow work actually is. You can explore some more resources, healing tools, and deeper reflections through the links in the description, along with recommended readings to support your journey. Thank you for spending this time with me, for your openness, and for your courage. Much love.